we are standing in front of the Kimi K3 booth.
Right.
It's the talk of the town here. How big is this going to be a shake-up for global frontier AI models?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ming. I think Kimi's new model is definitely a surprise, to both Wall Street and the Silicon Valley. The biggest, takeaway is now, we have, the debate heating up again over, open source models versus closed models. If Kimi can produce at a much lower cost, and it's an open weight model versus, Claude and OpenAI, and then the question will be naturally, do we still need to stick to the closed model, as all the US AI companies, try to, keep on, and then the rest of the world will also look at China as like, okay, so now we have a more affordable solution, it's like a perfect plan B. So that's, a clear challenger to the dominance of US AI models.
I think one concern right now is that given that this is such a huge model, right, 2.8 trillion parameters, that means that running it requires a huge amount of accelerators.
That's right.
So given the shortage of GPUs because of the export controls, is this going to limit the deployment of the Kimi K3 model?
You are really on the spot. I think, this is also a question that will raise a lot of, eyebrows in Washington, D.C. After all the efforts, to restrict like H200 and other chips for export, and, Kimi now give the result, even without the H200, I think they still use some H100 chips plus some domestic chips, and they can still have the K3 models, ready. And you just see Alibaba also last night announced their new model. I don't think they have like access to a large amount of H200 no matter what. So, the question is whether the export control is really effective, and I think this will be also a key issue for the US-China AI dialogue. Both sides will, rethink about the strategy.
Is there a concern that because of the lack of those GPUs, even though they have come up with a new model now, the processing and the running and the usage rates could be constrained by how much compute they have?
So far it is. I think Alibaba was also very humble to say that new model is second to Claude's Miso and Fable. So you can see the Chinese companies know where the limits are, but this is just for now, right? Give it like 5 more years, the story could be very different. And I was also very curious. I saw Huawei also released the new AI class. So the logic is pretty simple. I can't beat you on the individual chips, but if I can have a better integrated solution, that can also match the capacity of H200.
So we saw the tech rout in Asia and the US since Friday. Do you think that is justified, or is it an overreaction at this point?
No, unfortunately, I think the AI race, between the US and China, now go really to the next level. We heard the President Xi's announcement of WICO, the new international organization on AI. In my view, it's very much an answer to the Pax Silica, led by the US. So my point is, the competition between the US and China on AI is not just between the two countries. Now it's really about, where to grab your partners and allies. The competition will be driven by US and China, but it's already on the world stage.
And when you look at the two bifurcation in the tech ecosystem right now, you have the US making leaps and bounds in the hardware side,
right,
and China making progress in the software side.
Right.
So where do you think China and US would stand in this race in the next 3 to 5 years?
Right. I'm really glad you mentioned the software part. We talk about those frontier models most of the time, but there are also very interesting, for example, like AI video generators, right? Chinese technology actually already dominating that space. Everybody knows, if you do like short videos, production studios, they already know CDance, which is created by ByteDance. So TikTok is already a sort of headache for the US, and now the US had to deal with like what do you deal with like a CDance? They are already like the most popular AI video generator. So I think that China will go try to go stronger and stronger in the software part. They know the hardware, the chips will take time to mature, but this is still on their radar.
The Chinese government did approve a small amount of H200 chips import.
Right.
How do you read into this? Is it a reflection of the shortage we're seeing here?
The shortage is for sure.
How serious is it?
So I understand, based on my conversation with Chinese tech companies, they can deal with the situation. It's not ideal, especially for Alibaba, ByteDance, when they try to develop the next frontier models. You still need advanced chips. But for most, regular R&D, the Huawei chips, can do the work, so far. I think that the small quarter, that will be allowed, to be imported to China. This is a very much, diplomatic, gesture.
Given that many of these Chinese AI models are being sold at just a fraction of US pricing,
right,
how sustainable is this for the companies? Are they making losses and subsidizing consumers in the process?
In a way, it is. The Chinese government subsidies is obvious, right? We talk about chips, but you also saw the robots, right? This year, the WSC has like the entire floor for robots, and then you go around every robot company is like Beijing, Wuhan, Shanghai. So like clearly government backed. The chip industry is the same. I think from the top level, the message is at all costs, no matter what. In the 5 years, you have to develop a China's homegrown chips that can match H200. So everybody put the money in, including the private sector. There will be some winners and losers.
And given the latest progress over this weekend with the new AI models, do you foresee more actions being taken by the US government to place curbs on any tech transfers to China?
I believe so. I think the US will, as we just said, I think Washington will get more concerned, to have a reflection on the export control policy. It will probably make Jensen Huang more difficult to convince, the Commerce and the Congress to continue to export more, advanced models to China, given, Kimi, with the very limited supply of, U.S. chips, they already got to K3, right? Can you imagine if you have like full access to H200, give it like 2 years, the story could be different. On the business side, I think Wall Street would also be a little bit concerned whether models like K3 would grab some customers, which originally rely on U.S. models. But there's already a trend. A lot of companies began to use the hybrid model. They use the Chinese model for some basic research. They use the US model for some advanced research. This is not good news for companies like Anthropic and OpenAI because they consider they are the king of the world, but now the position is being challenged.